All right, so jumping back into chapter 3, we defined what demand and supply were last time. We defined what an equilibrium was. We talked about what happens when we're outside of equilibrium, that there's some natural forces that incentivize producers to either decrease the price if we're above equilibrium or increase the price if we're below equilibrium. Now we're going to start talking about what happens when an event happens. So usually a current event of some kind. How does demand and supply react? And then what are the resulting predictions that we may have for the price and the quantity after that demand and supply shift? Now, in order to do any of this, we have to learn what is perhaps an economist's favorite phrase, which is ceteris paribus, not capitalized P. Ceteris paribus is a Latin phrase that means all other things being equal, or all else equal. And so this is the notion that we are going to have to hold constant everything else except for all the outside variables or events, and just focus on the supply or demand shift. And to be complete, I'll have to say shift because, of course, this becomes a little bit more complicated once we actually start to shift both supply and demand at the same time, or perhaps we have something that is, shifting demand twice. So what are things that are going to shift the demand curve? So first of all, we already talked about this last class, but it's worth mentioning again. There's a big difference between a movement along my demand curve, which would be any sort of change in the price, right? If the price went from P high to P low, that would be a movement along my demand curve. And that would be a change in what our quantity demanded, not our demand. We would call this quantity demanded 1, quantity demanded 2, whatever the case may be. Compare that to a shift in demand, which is going to look something like this. So this is a movement along the demand curve. As the price decreases, the quantity demand increases. And this is a shift of the demand curve. And this one in particular is going to be a leftwards or an inward shift. So I like to think of it as, are you going left or are you going right? But you'll also hear of it as in or out. When we're referring to in or out, we're always referring to the y-axis. So is it going in and closer to the y-axis, or is it going out and away from the y-axis? But to keep things simple, I like to just go with leftward and rightward shift. What are some of the reasons why demand shifts happen? So the first one that a lot of our demand shifts are going to fall under is going to be changes in consumers' tastes and preferences. So some examples of this would be, kale. Nobody ate kale in the, western part of the world until, 15 years ago or something like that. All of a sudden, there's celebrities eating it and new studies coming out saying it's great for you, it's great for your digestion. Everybody starts eating it, right? A bit more relatable, I'm a big Marvel nerd, right? And so if there's a Marvel movie release, that may in turn increase the tastes and preferences for Marvel toys and goods and t-shirts and stuff like that, right? So sometimes, it's an advertising scheme, or, it's like, oh, the latest report says that, eggs are good for you, right? And so people increase their consumption of eggs. Latest report says, red meat is bad for you. So people decrease their consumption of red meat, right? That all falls into this bucket of changing your tastes and preferences. And I really want you guys to start thinking about these demand shifters as different buckets. Because again, unless one of these specific things is happening, and you can put it in one of these buckets, it's not a shift in demand. It's just a change in the quantity demanded. So I just want to stress as much as I can while we're learning it, that for the demand curve to actually shift and for us to get something like this, one of these factors has to be in play. So what is our second factor? So our second one is the income of the consumers. So, for instance, now this one, before we get into examples, we have to differentiate the fact that this is going to impact two different types of goods differently. So let's first talk about normal goods. They are just that, normal. So in a normal goods and services, as your income increases, your quantity demanded of those things, or sorry, not quantity, see, I just made the mistake right there. As your income increases, the demand at any given price is going to go ahead and increase. So we're used to, normal goods are like 90-something% of all the goods, right? Clothing's a normal good, computers are normal goods, streaming services are normal goods, hats are normal goods, tables are normal goods, pens are normal goods, everything's a freaking normal good, right? The only thing that's like, there are a few things that aren't normal goods. They are what's called inferior goods. Inferior goods mean they are defined by the fact that as your income increases, the demand for that good at any given price is going to go ahead and decrease. So inferior goods are goods where you outgrow them as you enter higher socioeconomic strata, right? So, example of and again, let's just do examples of inferior goods because normal goods are pretty much everything, right? But examples of inferior goods that I like to use are ramen noodles. Once you get past college, you pretty much never buy those little packets of ramen noodles ever again, right? Unless you like to cook and you can fancy them up, yada, yada, yada. But you're not just going to eat a packet of ramen noodles microwaved in water. That's something you grow out of as your income increases, right? You eat, more tasty foods. The other thing is to think about is, one-ply toilet paper, right? If you can afford to get better toilet paper, you're going to get better toilet paper, right? So as your income increases, your demand for this particular good, the one-ply toilet paper, is going to go ahead and decrease. Some other examples of inferior goods would be bus rides. As your income increases, right? If you live in a city, you may go from taking the bus every day to getting a car and commuting that way. So again, income is pretty straightforward. As we make more money, we're going to demand more of stuff at any given price. But if it's one of these special kind of goods called an inferior good, then we actually find that the demand decreases. flip-flops and does the opposite. Questions on taste and preferences or questions on income? Impact it has on demand. Pretty straightforward. So our third demand shifter, boop, boop, boop. Let's do this, and let's do, yeah, sure. Our third demand shifter here is going to be a pretty simple one, which is our population. And the way to kind of think about why is population in here is because the population is really determining the number of consumers. So if we were to have, if we were to open the floodgates and allow, 1 million Ukrainian refugees to come to the United States and settle here, there would be an increase in demand for pretty much all goods, right? The number of people, it wouldn't be a lot because the population of the United States is 220 million, so it's kind of a drop in the bucket, right? But there would be a noticeable, perhaps not sizable, but noticeable increase in demand. We see this mostly not from immigration and stuff like that, right? Immigration or whatever. We usually see this, talking about population trends over time, right? As a population grows, what happens to the demand curve? It shifts outwards. As a population withers, right? Maybe it's undergoing demographic decay or something like that. That's going to shift the demand curve inwards. The other thing that we can think about, which is not fun to think about, but it's part of the reality of the world, is in conflict-laden areas, the population decreases because of casualties and people leaving and stuff like that too, right? So demand evaporates in places where there's significant amounts of conflict because of the erosion of the consumer base, to use some business terms to try to make it not so cruel and heartless. The fourth one is a bit more economic-y. This is the price or availability. Because at the end of the day, these are tied together, right? If something is not very available, if something is rare, then it often is really expensive, right? So sometimes things are going to talk about, something has become really rare, and sometimes it's going to say something has become really expensive, right? But they have the same kind of impact. The price or availability of what are called related goods. And again, we get to learn some new definitions in here. When we talk about related goods, we are talking about what are called complements. Note the E instead of the I. So it's not a compliment like you are so pretty. It is a complement, meaning it goes with something else. So some examples of this, hot dogs and hot dog buns. Some other examples of this could be peanut butter and jelly. Could be shrimp and cocktail sauce. So these are things that traditionally go together. And some of them go together very strongly, right? Like hot dogs and hot dog buns. Like, when are you going to be eating hot dog buns if you don't have hot dogs, right? Pretty much never. I guess maybe if they're around, but you're not going to go to the store and buy hot dog buns and not hot dogs. But some of you may be like, oh, I don't like jelly, or I don't like peanut butter. Oh, I put peanut butter with bananas. Oh, I put jelly just on toast by itself, or I put jelly with just regular, cow's butter, or whatever the case may be, right? So that's not as strong of a compliment as something like hot dogs and hot dog buns. I think shrimps and cocktail sauce is a very, very strong one, because I tried to be a vegetarian for 6 years, and one of the things I really missed was shrimps and cocktail sauce, and I tried everything else to put in cocktail sauce, and nothing tasted good. Shrimps are the only thing that really work well with cocktail sauce in my experience. So for that reason, it is a good complement example. The other types of goods that we have to be aware of are substitute goods. Substitutes are just that. They are things that we will buy in place of one another, right? So, Coke and Pepsi. Some other examples of substitutes might be, we could say, hot dogs and hamburgers. Substitutes could be also something that's more fine, like it could be fresh peas versus frozen peas. Right? All of a sudden, the price of fresh peas goes up. You're just going to go buy a bag of frozen peas. So the price of related goods impacts demand depending on what type of good it is. Let's do an example real quick. So if we have this following setup, we've got some downward sloping demand curve like this, and if my market is frozen peas, and if I tell you all in the prompt the price of fresh peas has increased, you're going to say, oh, fresh peas, those are a substitute for frozen peas. That means that more people are going to now demand frozen peas, and so there's going to be an outward shift or a rightward shift in my demand curve at any given price, right? It doesn't matter if the price of frozen peas is $1 a bag. It doesn't matter if the price of the frozen peas is $2. It doesn't matter if it's $5, right? That's the ceteris paribus kind of assumption too playing in there. This is happening at any given price. Now let's do a similar example for complements. So I will do cocktail sauce. And I'm going to say the prompt is, the price of shrimp has increased significantly. And so as a result of the price of shrimp increasing significantly, we are going to have a shift inwards in the cocktail sauce because those things are purchased together. And that means at any given price for cocktail sauce, again, it could be $1, could be $2, could be $5, doesn't matter. At any given price of cocktail sauce, there's going to be less of a quantity demanded than there was before, right? There was more of a quantity demanded before we had this shift, and then we did this shift, and now there's less of a quantity demanded. Any questions on complements and substitutes? So this is just generally in the price of related goods category. Awesome. Last one before we switch to supply is our changes in the expectation of the future. And I guess that seems redundant to me because you can't expect the present or the past, right? So maybe just changing expectations. We don't really need to put of the future in there, right? Just changing expectations. Expectations are always future oriented. So what's going on here? Well, we kind of saw this during the COVID epidemic, right? We saw the fact that, people thought that, everything was going to shut down and they weren't going to be able to get any goods, right? And so everybody went out and panic bought, canned goods and toilet paper and paper towels and all sorts of stuff, right? Another great example is, what if I went and told you that the price of gas, I have it on good authority that the price of gasoline is going to go to $7 a gallon in a week, right? what are you going to do today in terms of your gas tank, right? Are you going to wait for the week to go by, or are you going to go ahead and get some gas right now? You're going to go get the gas right now, right? And so if you have an expectation that something is getting more expensive, it's going to mean regardless of the actual price of gasoline. Yeah, this is also the self-fulfilling prophecy problem as well, 100%. It will make it happen even if there isn't something that's going to make the price of gasoline go up, just the expectation of it going up is going to cause demand to increase, and once we tie in supply, it's going to result in a higher equilibrium price. So similarly, what happens if I tell you that, the latest, so for instance, the latest Oculus Quest VR headset thing dropped, right? And so as a result, if you have an expectation that this great one is going to happen, you're probably not going to buy the old one, right? So any kind of expectation in the future, both having to do with prices or having to do with quality, right? So if you expect the quality of something to increase in the future, what are you going to do with your demand right now? It's going to shrink. You're going to wait and you're going to purchase that good ostensibly for the same price, right? Like if I told you that the PlayStation is going to come out with a new PlayStation next year, it's going to be the same price. If you don't have a PlayStation, are you going to buy one today? No, you're going to wait, right? So demand's going to shift inwards anytime we have any changes of expectation, both having to do with price and having to do with quality. That words, quality. Questions on demand shifters? Okay.